Israel's airstrikes are continuing across Gaza, with at least another 24 Palestinians being killed overnight. Right now, many Palestinians remain trapped under the rubble, breathing their last breaths as Israel continues its genocide against the starved and the besieged people of Gaza, my homeland. Our young contributors are messaging us from Gaza. Many of them have lost hope in this life, and even saying that death is a relief for them because they can't cope with more of this horrifying situation. On Monday, the UK Foreign Minister David Lammy said in Parliament that Israel had indeed broken international law in Gaza, but yesterday the government backtracked and rejected that claim. Here to discuss all of this and more is independent British MP and former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. Welcome, Jeremy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's interesting, the last remark you made. David Lammy made that remark about the breach of international law in response to my question, which I was interested in his reply. And then I was disgusted that 24 hours later they pretend they never said it.
But why, Jeremy, if I may ask, why did it take David Lammy 16 months of genocide to admit that Israel breached the international law? We have seen what happened in Gaza. We have seen over 15,000 kids being killed and slaughtered. Most of the Gaza Strip was demolished. And then after 16 months, you come and say that Israel breached the international law. Was it clear?
It must have been very clear, not just from the last 16 months, but also from the last years when Gaza has either been under occupation or under siege. And we were just talking before we came to record this interview. I first went to Gaza more than 30 years ago, and I recall then it was under occupation. There were settlements and so on there, and there was some destruction, but compared to now, it was relatively stable. And on another visit, I remember being quite shocked that we'd heard an explosion during the night, and then we went out the next day, and there'd been one of these Israeli bombardments on a specific house, and the whole house had been destroyed, but the other buildings around it untouched. So there was continuous targeted bombing going on. And what we've now got since October 23 has been essentially a Second World War style carpet bombing of the whole place. And the loss of life is, to me, just devastating. We're looking at least 60,000 known deaths. I suspect it's going to be very, very much more than that as the rubble is uncovered. And
not only that, Jeremy, but now as we are speaking, the Israel Defense Minister Katz said that it sent a message to the people in Gaza and told them that residents of Gaza, this is your final warning. The first sin war destroyed Gaza, and the second sin war will bring upon it total ruin. And he kept on threatening Gaza as if everything that they have done is not enough, and now they will come with more power and more help with the people in Gaza. What is left in Gaza to be destroyed, and what is the position of the UK government from these comments?
All they seem able to do now is continue to bomb piles of rubble to make them into even smaller stones and bricks of rubble. I mean, it's completely deranged, their behaviour and what they're doing. And I am constantly astonished at the attitude of successive British governments on this. Clearly illegal, clearly a war crime to hit a school, take away water supply, take away electricity, stop food supplies going in, destroy a hospital. All of that is clearly illegal within the war crimes. And Israel is in breach not just of International Court of Justice, but also International Criminal Court and the Fourth Geneva Convention, not to mention numerous United Nations Security Council and other resolutions about the right of a civilian population to be able to live in peace. It is disgraceful and disgusting what is going on. And there's a number of us in the UK Parliament have raised the issue not just since October 23, but going back many, many years through the various Palestine groups that I've been a member of, all of them, and delegations we've sent there in solidarity. What's also happening now, which I'm sure you're more aware of than me, is the continued occupation and bombardment of the West Bank.
Of
And
course.
for the first time that I can recall for a long time, the use of aircraft to destroy buildings on the West Bank. That didn't happen before. And so it seems to me that the big plan of Israel is to expel the population of Gaza into the Sinai, or try and persuade a North African nation to take them, all of whom have refused, and at the same time to continue the intensity of the occupation of the West Bank and yet more settlements. And so you look at the map of Palestine from 1948 onwards, and if you think of the Palestinians as a green color, it's now just a few green dots over the West Bank.
Yes, and talking about war crimes, everything that's happening in Palestine, in the Palestinian occupied territories, are war crimes. The ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in Gaza is a war crime. Starving the population in Gaza is a war crime. Killing tens of thousands of children and women is a war crime. And settlements in the West Bank is a grave violation of the international law. And here in the UK, what we need from the government is to go and investigate these war crimes. And that's why I was very happy to hear that you recently called for a Chilcot-style inquiry into the UK's involvement in Israel's war in Gaza, a move that could expose the complicity of the UK government in Israel's genocide. So, Jeremy, can you please, for a few minutes, explain to our listeners what the Chilcot inquiry was and why it is such an important and necessary move right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I can explain it. After the Iraq War had, I'd not say completely ended, but had been declared as over by the US at one stage, there was an inquiry, the Butler inquiry, which was deeply unsatisfactory into how decisions had been made and what the effects of those decisions had been and the legality of the war. There was also a Parliamentary Select Committee inquiry, which in my view was equally unsatisfactory. Those of us that had always opposed the Iraq War then kept demanding an open public inquiry into both the decision-making process, the cost to Britain, the loss of life, and the longer-term effects of it, and in particular challenging Tony Blair's assertion that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was capable of launching an attack on all of Europe within 45 minutes. And this was, to us, something that had to be examined and tested. So eventually we persuaded the then government, led by Gordon Brown, to appoint John Chilcot to head an inquiry into it. Chilcot then took a long time to undertake the inquiry, several years, the most lengthy and detailed public inquiry ever in British history, I think, and eventually produced the report in 2016, which indicated a number of things. The huge loss of life of both British soldiers, American soldiers, Iraqi soldiers, and enormous loss of life of Iraqi civilians, the way in which decisions were made, the way in which there'd been a suppression of legal advice to the government that the war was at the very least questionable, not to say illegal. And the Chilcot Report finally came out in the summer of 2016. I'd become leader of the Labour Party by that stage. I was therefore going to be the first one to respond to the publication of the Chilcot Report. I was under enormous pressure in the Labour Party to resign as leader because many of those that were culpable in the decision to go to war did not want me, welcoming the fact that Sir John Chilcot had produced the report, and then doing what I did afterwards, which I'll explain in a moment. And so I obviously refused to resign and made clear that we welcomed the report and we welcomed the recommendations within the report about government legal advice and government processes and how things should be more open in the future. And straight after the Chilcot inquiry, I then that same day, invited a group of the families of soldiers who had lost their lives in Iraq, British soldiers, their families. I invited them all to come and we had an event in Church House, which is a big conference centre owned by the Church of England, very near to Parliament, very beautiful building. And so we arranged there for me to issue and present, as I promised I would, a formal apology on behalf of the Labour Party to those that had lost their lives and to the decision to go to war. And of course, that included the Iraqi people and families who had also lost their lives. And I made that presentation, and it was, to me, a fulfillment of a pledge I'd made when I first put my name forward to be leader of the opposition. And then after that, I wanted to go much further with it. And so we then drafted a war powers bill, which would mean that no UK government could involve Britain in military activities without first bringing the issue to Parliament and there being a specific vote in Parliament, thus putting pressure on every member of Parliament. They can't hide behind the royal prerogative, which is where the Prime Minister can take us to war without parliamentary approval. They would then have to stand up and be counted. And so I want the same Chilcot-style inquiry. Now, we've made the call. It's gained a lot of support. The Guardian very kindly published my letter on this subject, signed by a number of colleagues, and it's supported by a lot of different organisations. We will keep making this demand, but if the government continues to either refuse to comment or refuses to have a Chilcot-style inquiry, then we'll do a number of things. One is we'll continue parliamentary pressure, including debates demanding it. And then I'm quite happy to do what Bertrand Russell and others did over Vietnam way back when they organised the Russell Tribunal on the culpability of the US particularly, but other countries as well, on the Vietnam War. So we will have an open process with expert opinion, witnesses and evidence, of which the book that you're producing will be a key part of that evidence. The voices of the people of Gaza who've lost their loved ones, lost their homes, lost their schools, lost their doctors, lost their health centres, and whose future is very, very bleak, particularly as in the last 2 days, Israel has not only committed another war crime in refusing water and other essential supplies, but also restarted massive bombardment. So I want to know, and I really do want to know, who in the British government authorised that overflying of Gaza? Who in the British government authorised the delivery of weapons? Who in the British government knowingly provided weapons to a country that has been arraigned before the ICJ and the ICC?
Well, that's great. But Jeremy, the Chilcot inquiry, while significant, ultimately did not lead to any criminal prosecution. Am I right? So, for example,
Sure.
Tony Blair, despite being condemned for his role in the Iraq War, continues to enjoy impunity. How can we ensure that this inquiry, should it happen, actually leads to justice and not just another report that gets buried by those in power?
Well, you're correct. The perpetrators of the Iraq War have so far evaded any prosecution by either the ICC or ICJ for humanitarian crimes. I do think that both courts have developed a much greater robustness in the way that they do things. I supported the Rome Statute. I supported the introduction of the law which brought us into the ICC. But I have to say, to begin with, I was quite disappointed. They refused to take up the cases that many of us were pushing them on Iraq. However, I was there at the ICJ when South Africa made its application, and they made it in a brilliant style, and they made their decisions and published their opinion. They've done the same at the ICC. So I think we're in a completely different international legal framework and atmosphere. Despite what most British, European and American media say, world opinion is not with Israel, is not supporting of the bombardment, is not supporting the acts of a genocidal nature, and is not supporting the occupation either of Gaza or of the West Bank. So I think the world has changed and moved on a great deal, and we have got to continue that pressure. Will our inquiry bring about prosecutions? I cannot say. I wished I could, but I do know that my role here in Britain has to be to support the Palestinian people, has to be to mobilize people on the demonstrations, and has to be to relentlessly raise the issue in the British Parliament. That's what I was elected to do, and that's what I will do.
But Jeremy, in many of my public speaking events, I get asked from people who are listening to me. They would feel so outraged at what's happening, but at the same time, they're very powerless, and they often need ask me for advice what they should do, what should they do, what can they do to push for this inquiry, the average people, I mean, and to push for justice more equally. How can ordinary citizens ensure that the government is held accountable for its role in the destruction of Gaza, and that this genocide is finally brought to an end, and that Israel occupation finally lifted? What can ordinary people do?
We use every avenue that's open to us to raise awareness, raise issues, raise demands, and raise demonstrations. So it is protesting about Elbit Systems manufacturing in Britain. It is about the street demonstrations. It is about pressure on the media. It is about pressure in Parliament. It is also about doing everything we can to get direct aid to the people of Gaza. I was at an event in Rochdale 2 weeks ago where Greengate, very good charity, had managed to raise a lot of money to get some trucks to go into Gaza. And it was a nice coincidence that at the very time we were having our event in Rochdale, we got news directly that the truck had got in and the aid was being distributed. And so in the raising of funds and collection of goods to send to Gaza as part of aid, that itself is a political act, because you're making sure that people are fully aware. And so I know it's frustrating, and I say this at every demonstration and rally we do, but it's the very least we can do. And if you stay home, do nothing, and sort of grunt at your television in disagreement, that's not going to change anything. Going out on the streets has some effect.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very, very much for joining me today. And thank you for your commitment to justice and accountability. It is really inspiring what you're doing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been my
We hope
pleasure.
Yeah,
It's been my pleasure to be with you today. And in memory of all those beautiful people in Gaza and the West Bank who lost their lives, we will carry on for as long as it takes to get the justice they deserve.
thank you very, very much, Jeremy.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this analysis, please like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting us by donating as little as £1 per month by heading to palestinedeepdive.com/support.